Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha, here with another character build examination. Now this one's going to be formatted a little bit differently because this is taking the concept of the spin to win, which somebody mentioned before. I kind of threw it into a little bit into my Conjurer class examination, not build examination, the actual separate class examination, and first off, I didn't give it the justice it deserved. It was originally mentioned that I did not cover the spin to win in the Warlord coverage, so I wanted to actually do a specific episode talking about the spin to win build, because there's actually 3 different ways you can approach spin to win. Now, the spin to win build focuses 100% on the Eye of Reckoning ability, which is just you spinning around like a Beyblade, doing physical and fire damage. Going into Soulfire, obviously you want to go into that because it helps keep you alive, reduces target's damage, adds some lightning damage here. It's a pretty spicy time. Now, there are 3 different versions of this build. There is the tanky version, there's the balanced version, and then there is the aggressive version. And then there's a couple of different versions I've heard of that just aren't usually, without specific items, are broadly not as effective as these other 3. So first I want to talk about the defensive one, which is the one that a lot of people classically think about, which is the Warlord spin to win, Oathkeeper Soldier. Now, usually you're going to go in for Divine Mandate because you're doing physical and fire damage, slow resistance reduction, which is important for spinning. So this is basically 2 skills that your build is almost always going to have. Usually, Divine Mandate is what people go for. That's fine. Out of this setup, you can go for a shield. You can use a shield, which will increase your damage, increase your armor, and with the defensive version, you are generally going to be looking to do a shield, because unlike you usually would, you're not going to lose a whole lot of damage with the defensive spin to win, so using a melee weapon and a shield, spin to win, as long as you have safeguard, is not going to be a problem. Now, since your main goal here is just spin to victory, straight up, you're generally going to want Presence of Virtue, and that's exclusively for the energy regeneration. The extra internal trauma or bleeding damage, the physical damage retaliation, the offensive ability, none of that's important for this build. None of that matters. You just need the energy regeneration. Now, you could go into Haven for just better healing, more health. This is actually a pretty good pickup. Most of this will help keep you alive while you're spinning. This you can go into if you really want to. I don't always necessarily take it this far. It really depends on circumstances. If I'm playing this solo, I'll usually go for this, but if I'm playing with allies, if I'm playing with anyone else, this isn't usually necessary. It adds very little damage, and the resistance to life reduction and reflected damage reduction is generally not quite as important. You're not really doing a whole lot of retaliation damage anyways, so it doesn't really matter. What you usually, I'm just going to pull this out just for kicks, you are usually going to go for resilience, and there's a very important reason for this. Because with the defensive version of this build, I'm going to actually temporarily pull out Divine Mandate as well. You're guaranteed going to want Menhir's Will, first off, because this will, again, keep you alive while you're spinning, like a lunatic. You can go for Fighting Spirit. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I mean, it just randomly activates whenever you're taking damage. It's increasing your damage output. It's not a bad thing. I almost always go for Military Conditioning here. It's just insanely useful. Again, shield training, just for more durability. Veterancy you can go for as well if you really want to. I usually also go for Decorated Soldier. Again, you are doing physical damage there, so that's pretty nice. You could go for Scars of Battle. Again, if I'm playing solo, I'm more likely to go Scars of Battle, then I'm likely to go for Rebuke. I just don't find Rebuke that useful, broadly speaking. I'm usually going to find the stun and freeze duration reduction more important, because you don't want to be stunned or frozen when you're spinning to win. Period. Alright? Now, Fighting Spirit is possibly nice, but again, that's 12 points you're pulling out from somewhere else. Usually I'm going to use this for Divine Mandate. If I'm really concerned about my durability, though, Menhir's Bulwark. This is basically just to give you damage absorption, healing effect increase. I don't normally necessarily always build this. There are a couple of occasions where I just have a lot of items that do retaliation damage, and I just kind of go for a bit of a retaliation thing. I use Counter-Strike instead, I'll build a bit of a retaliation build. It's pretty tough to pull off without specific items, so I don't usually do that, but I'll usually do Divine Mandate. So when I spin to win as a Warlord, this is generally how I work. And again, Resilience is only primarily here, so that way your Menhir's Will heals you for more. So basically, with this build, if your equipment increases your energy regeneration enough, or your Presence of Virtue increases your energy regeneration enough, you can just spin and spin and spin. It is almost impossible to kill you because you're getting self-healed. You've got the increased shield block chance from Haven, from Safeguard, from shield training. You have the extra health from military conditioning. You've got the extra health regeneration passively here. You've got Scars of Battle if you need more armor absorption. You've got so many different options here. You will not be doing as much damage, absolutely. You do sacrifice a little bit of damage. Not a whole lot. You maintain most of this, even with a single-hand weapon and a shield. But just be aware that there is a little bit less damage, but you are going to be way more durable. This is, again, the only real issue you're going to hit with this particular, more defensive spin to win is energy issues. So you kind of want to make sure you've either got the, I think it's the Ectoplasm, which increases your energy regeneration, or your items just naturally increase your energy regeneration. You're going to need to do something about your energy regen, because at some point, while initially Presence of Virtue will be enough, at some point you will find that it isn't going to be enough. You will need more energy regen to infinitely spin. And how you solve that problem is going to be purely your equipment. Any equipment at all that increases energy regeneration does just fine. So this isn't really so much of a build, oh, you need items. You need specific effects, and you can just slap on particular components anyways and go a long way towards increasing that anyways. So this is what I call the defensive spin to win. Alright, defensive Beyblade is the Warlord, Oathkeeper, and Soldier. Now the balanced middle ground version of this is very specifically Shieldbreaker, which is the Demolitionist with the Oathkeeper. So you build this up again. You're running Divine Mandate again. You're not necessarily going into Safeguard though, but you will still be going into Resilience, and you will at the very least still be going into Presence of Virtue. You can use a shield for this. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It's just a matter of, are you going to be more defensive or more offensive? Because with the Demolitionist, you're going into Flame Touched, which increases the fire and lightning damage from Eye of Reckoning. Alright. You don't go into Temper because you aren't doing that much Pierce and internal trauma damage, but you are going to go into Vindictive Flame. Olzuin's Wrath, so that way as people are hitting you while you're spinning for victory, you're healing yourself based off of Olzuin's Wrath. You're doing damage to the ranged enemies who are going to be shooting you, which is a problem with the defensive one. The defensive one has to actually take the time to spin its way over to the ranged enemies. With the Shield Breaker spin to win, Shield Beyblade, Beyblade Breaker, however you want to call this, Beyblade Breaker just does not care about ranged. They'll just shoot themselves to death on your Olzuin's Wrath. And then finally, you're going to finish up with the Delicious Blast Shield. Alright? Now, actually, I forgot to mention something. You're actually not going to have both of these maxed out here, so you could actually pull points out here. I completely forgot about this. Pardon me, I'm just accidentally kicking my mic. Don't ask me how I'm managing that. And go into Fighting Spirit for a little bit of a damage boost if you want. Or you could go into Field Command for extra armor. Again, totally your choice. I don't usually do this unless I'm with allies, because using this by yourself feels very silly, and is kind of silly compared to the amount of damage you can increase with Fighting Spirit every once in a while. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that really briefly. But at this particular point, you've got a couple of options. So your first real option here is to go into Ascension and just activate this for fire retaliation damage, clarity of purpose. You can do this, whether or not you have a shield. That's fine. perfectly okay. Alternatively, in this particular setup, you can go into Guardian of Empyrean, who will, when you have Celestial Presence, increase your fire and physical damage output. And you can still go into some of these other ones if you really wanted to. You can still go into Ascension, which will help just keep you alive a little bit longer. You can still go into Clarity of Purpose. Now, personally for me, when I do Beyblade Breaker, which is what I'm now going to call it from now on, and you can't stop me, I usually do go for the shield. I must admit, I have a weakness for shields. I like them. I'm a support main in Smite. It's just how I work. Go for Haven. Again, Rebuke. Rebuke at least matters a little bit more because you actually have retaliation damage off of Vindictive Flame and Oldswin's Wrath. So you actually have retaliation damage to take advantage of, so this matters a little bit more. So, and then I actually will usually go for Ascension anyways, go for a bit of Clarity of Purpose. You could still go for the Guardians of Empyrean here. Actually, what you may even want to do is go for them regardless. Just go for this. Take these points out. Rebuke. Then go for Celestial Presence. Which just gives you something else. I mean, these don't affect the spin to win. They're just going to float around and decrease the protections of the enemy, the defenses of the enemy that they're hitting. I mean, they're straight up invincible, so they don't even care. It's not like you're going to need to resummon them. Once you have your 2 Guardians of Empyrean, they're not going to die on you. So that's not really a problem. They're scaling with your player bonuses, so they're getting the benefit of Flame Touched. What's not to love? They're absolutely fantastic. Now, the reason why you wouldn't normally want these with the Beyblade Lord, or the War Beyblade, is because in this particular case, you are focusing really heavily on the defensive attributes that you have access to with the soldier. So while you have them, why not? But the Demolitionist has very little to offer here. There is a really nice damage boost here. Obviously, Blast Shield is going to help keep you alive. And obviously, Vindictive Flame and Oldswin's Wrath not only help you kind of counter ranged enemies, but because Vindictive Flame increases total speed, you actually get to Beyblade faster. And I'm not talking about its attack speed, I'm talking about its, well, okay, the attack speed actually is increased, because this does matter at attack speed, so, in fact, Vindictive Flame is increasing your spin rate, but it's also increasing the move speed while you're spinning, so it's just a faster Beyblade, besides the bonus damage you're just doing to everyone around you anyways. So, that's very helpful. And it's mostly the Oldswin's Wrath that we're trying to increase the healing of with Resilience. That's mainly why this is here. Of course, Safeguard is just a delicious thing to have anyways when you're Beyblading. And so with this particular case, you can have the Guardians of Empyrean both run Distraction, and they reduce the enemy's defenses, which allows you to do a little bit more damage as well. So this is usually how I like to Beyblade. If I'm kind of, if I'm going to be going into, say, a hardcore Beyblade, I want to go with the Beyblade Lord, the War Beyblade. This is I'll usually go for this setup if I'm going to Beyblade in hardcore, where, you can only die once. This is where you would take that. Broadly speaking, this is going to give you a bit more flexibility in your responses to situations. You don't need to worry quite so much about ranged enemies. You don't need to necessarily worry so much about dying quite as... Well, I mean, it's not quite as survivable as the War Beyblade, but it still can keep you alive a decent amount of time. It does more respectable damage than the previous one, but if you want to really maximize your damage output, and this is even more effective with allies, with friends, you go for the very delicious... Actually, I'm going to pull this back here. We're going to go for the scrumptious Beybladen. I'm supposed to Paladin. I'm just going to refer to Beyblade the whole time now. Now, instead of going for Celestial Presence like the other two normally would, instead you go for Aura of Censure. If you've been watching my melee dual pistols, you know why. Reducing the elemental resistance of enemies, that means their fire and their lightning. It does fire damage to everyone around you. It disrupts enemy skills, which means they have less ways to counterattack you. It reduces their damage output. It just is a glorious thing to just have around in general. But wait, there's more. You can go into Deadly Aim, which also increases your damage output anytime you are just Beyblading, you get a critical, boom, wow, now I'm doing more damage. Furthermore, you have access to the extremely delicious Word of Renewal, which you generally want to at least get to Vigor for extra healing, reduction of freeze, petrify, and entrapment, which is pretty important when you're Beyblading. Whether or not you want to go into Steel Resolve, I don't normally. Sometimes I will for the resistance if I'm having a really hard time getting Aether and Chaos resistance, which is, for me, like 2/3 of the time. So I sometimes will either temporarily or permanently add this on, just on the basis that resistance, it's up to you, really. I still will usually go for Guardian of Empyrean. Maybe it would be worth going all the way up here. I keep forgetting that this is at the end of the line there. Still going for Resilience. Still going for Presence of Virtue. But with this one, you don't go with shields. I don't do a shield with this one. I do a two-handed weapon for maximizing my damage output even further. It's all about that damage output. I usually will go with Ascension just to try to keep myself alive a little bit longer. Go for Clarity of Purpose, again for a similar reason of just trying to keep yourself alive a little longer. Haven has shield block chance increased, and even though the healing effect's increased and increased health, you're only using half of this, so I don't usually go for this. I'll usually instead go for Ascension. You get a little bit of damage absorption, you increase your damage output, so basically the idea is just to kill them before they kill you with the most damaging Beyblade you can get your hands on. This Beybladen this is the most damaging version, and this is also the most useful with friends because you are more actively decreasing the enemy's resistances. You have elemental resistance reduction here, you have physical and fire resistance here, you have bleeding resistance if your friends cause them to bleed. I mean, the whole setup here is really intended to reduce the enemy's protections as much as possible, or resistances as much as possible, and to maximize your Beyblade damage. Alright? That is the goal here, and if you have friends who can take advantage of these reduced resistances, so much the better. Now, I want to talk about the three combinations that really don't Beyblade well, even without specific items. If you have specific items that really help the combination out, that's a totally different story. But in terms of improvising a Beyblade build, where you just want a Beyblade and don't want to worry about equipment, these are not great. The first one I want to talk about, because this is something that's going to come to a lot of people's mind, I'm not going to actually play with the points really, is Shaman. The main problem with Shaman is that there is extremely little that you can do with Shaman that does not interrupt your Beyblading. You can get Mogdragon's Pact to increase your health regeneration, your energy regeneration, which is nice, and your physical damage. You get more health regeneration here, you get more health there, you get more armor here, yay, wonderful. Everything else here interrupts your spinning. And that's not what you want. You could potentially go into Stormcaller's Pact, but that also increases cold damage. You're not doing cold damage. Alright? With the Guardians of Empyrean, when you spawn, you summon your two Guardians, they're invincible, they don't have a time limit, they're just there. Always. You don't need to resummon them, they're never going to interrupt your spin. Never. You die, you come back, resummon your Guardians, return to where you died, back to spinning. But even with these only last 14 seconds, so pretty constantly you got to be throwing Wind Devils out there, and that means you're not spinning. That means you're not winning. This Shaman really doesn't work. It only has, honestly, just Mogdragon's Pact, and it's not worth picking up Shaman for that. Now, this isn't the only negative experience for Beyblading that you can have. I've seen, again, one final disclaimer, this does to some extent depend upon your items. Now, this actually is a little bit more viable, because you can actually go into Inner Focus, which helps you get more criticals and increases your elemental damage, and you have Iskandra's Elemental Exchange, which increases your elemental damage. And you have, of course, Maven's Sphere of Protection, which you can use to increase your defense. And if you really wanted to, you could go into Arcane Will. That's really it. You could go into Mental Alacrity if you're really worried about your spin duration. This one's okay. The problem is that it's tacking on a certain amount of ice damage that you really... hold on, this only affects your regular attacks, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Yes. This only affects your regular attacks, so that doesn't actually affect you. But we can still go for these. You get your spin to win. Oop. Get these. You don't have self-heal here. My main issue with the Templar Beyblade is primarily Maven's Sphere. This is expensive, energy-wise. Even if you have mental alacrity, it's expensive. Okay? Now, if you're going to be Beyblading like this, you actually do need Maven's Sphere. You may not necessarily need conversion, so you can actually pull that out if you really want to, but you at least need Maven's Sphere of Protection. And you may be asking yourself, Professor, why would we need Maven's Sphere of Protection while Beyblading? Short answer is there's no self-heal like with the other ones. This particular setup here, see, the Oathkeeper doesn't really do a whole lot of self-healing. Alright? You just don't have the options. This doesn't self-heal, this doesn't self-heal. This doesn't actually self-heal, this just boosts your healing. This doesn't heal you at all. This doesn't heal you. This just increases your health. This doesn't heal you. The Oathkeeper itself does not self-heal naturally. The Inquisitor has Word of Renewal plus Vigor. Demolitionist has Ultimate's Wrath. Soldier has Menhir's Will. Templar, the Arcanist part of Templar, has none of this. It's got Maven's Sphere. It is so much more expensive to Beyblade with Arcanist that even though, technically speaking, it can match the other ones in terms of power, at the end of the day, you cannot infinitely spin as easily because you have to compensate for way more energy cost per second. You have Maven's Sphere, you've got the spin to win going every second. It's hideously expensive, and this is why I really don't recommend the Templar spin to win. Templar Beyblade is too expensive in most situations. Now, if you have a specific set of items that compensate for that, that's a different story. But you have to have items specifically set aside for you to be able to pull this off. Not everyone has that. So, that's the story with why I don't recommend the Templar Beyblade. The last option that people may, pull those points out, may talk about is Occultist, because they're going to say, oh, you can summon the Hellhound for extra fire damage, for some chaos damage, or you can go for the Crow, it'll increase your lightning and fire damage, it'll heal you. The problem with both of these is that at some point they're going to die. It's inevitable. They are, unlike the Guardians of Empyreon, they're not invincible. They die. So, at some point, you're going to have to stop spinning to revive them, or you just spin until all the enemies are dead, and you just keep on going without your pet until the fight is over. And then you stop spinning, you revive your pet, and then you go on to the next fight where you spin until this rinse and repeat. They will eventually die, and you either revive them for the benefits they give you, or not. And honestly, again, your only real consistent form of self-heal here is Blood of Dreeg, and of course the Crow, but the Crow could die, and that's a whole separate problem, as we just discussed. So your only other option is Blood of Dreeg, which won't interrupt you, but also increases your Acid Retaliation, which you aren't going to really be doing. Even if you could go into Path of the Three, convert that fire and physical damage into acid damage, which has some merit. I will give you that, but you're still doing the lightning damage, which isn't going to be changed that much, and Blood of Dreeg and Aspect of the Guardian are then the only things you're really going to be looking to get into. It just doesn't really work as well as it would seem to at first glance. So that's what I have to say about the Beyblade or Spin to Win build. Alright, if you really want to Beyblade yourself into next week and win through the power of Beyblade, Oathkeeper plus either Inquisitor for the most damage, especially with friends, Demolitionist for a balance that also allows you to worry less about some of the accessories, like ranged enemies, or needing to actually, keep a consistent eye on your health, or if you just want to be the tankiest Beyblade that ever Beybladed, Soldier. Because then you can basically be having a full-blown conversation with someone else and making eye contact, and you never have to worry about dying in the middle of your Beyblading episodes, except in more extreme circumstances against certain bosses or abnormally large quantities of enemies. So, basically, it's choose your Beyblade. Do you want the defensive Beyblade? Do you want the bounced Beyblade? Or do you want the damaged Beyblade? So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the Beyblade episode. So, yeah, that's all I've got for this. So, thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours. If you liked this, please like and subscribe, and if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, what have you, please leave them down in the comment section below. Thank you very much.